If you're like me, randomly I'll see a Quiznos or someone will mention them and I'll think, what ever did happen with Quiznos? You know, back in the day, Quiznos was the talk of the town. In the early 2000s, they were everywhere. Nearly 4,700 locations worldwide, and seriously, they look like they could have eventually overtaken giants like Subway. Their toasted subs, man, they were game changers. So much so that in 2004, Subway even started offering the option to let people toast their subs. But fast forward a bit and the scene is not pretty. We're talking about a drop so steep, it's both shocking and depressing. The story is filled with controversy, bad decisions, and gut-wrenching stories. Quiznos went from thousands of locations to really barely hanging on with around 400 locations worldwide. That's a massive 91% decline. So how did things go south so quickly? Well, I dove deep into the history, events, and drama surrounding Quiznos, and you're in for one heck of a story, so buckle up and get ready. Now, if you didn't know, Quiznos was, well, they still are a franchise. There are actually over 4,000 different franchise brands in the United States alone, over 800,000 independent franchise businesses in the US, and 1 out of every 10 businesses you see is a franchise. So franchising is a part of the fabric of the United States economy. It's the most proven business model in history. It's like a business in a box. There are brands that you've heard of that you may not know are franchises, like Ace Hardware, Marriott Hotels, Pods, Jiffy Lube, Meineke, all franchises. So there are a ton of amazing franchises out there, and Quiznos' story, well, they're an example of the type of business to stay away from. In order to understand how Quiznos got to their current state of affairs, let's start from the beginning. The first Quiznos restaurant was opened in Denver, Colorado in 1981 by founder Jimmy Lombardos and his partner Todd Disner. Lombardos was an experienced chef, having worked for the Colorado Mine Company Steakhouse and founded the Italian restaurant Footers in 1978. He was an experienced restaurateur for sure. The first location was in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Denver. It featured special baguette-style bread, special dressings, and unique recipes. But Lombardos decided at the very first Quiznos location to toast the subs. He said it's a signature kind of thing, that heating anything brings out the flavors in food. It was this claim to fame that really helped pioneer Quiznos' growth. No one else was toasting sandwiches like they were. In 1983, the restaurant started offering franchises as a way to grow. Now, most of the iconic brands in the US and the world were only able to grow as big as they are because of franchising. Again, it's like a business in a box, but just be sure to avoid making the mistakes that Quiznos did. Back to the story. Through franchising, by 1987, Quiznos had 12 locations up and running. Then in 1991, with 18 locations, the founder sold the entire company to a guy named Rick Shaden and his father Richard. Rick and his father went on to rename the company Quiznos Franchise Corp from its previous Quiznos American Inc. Rick and his father were able to quickly grow the business. By 1995, Quiznos had 103 locations and was being traded as a public company on the stock market. Then in 1997, Quiznos became the number 3 sub-franchise in the world with 278 locations in the US and Puerto Rico. So in less than 10 years, Quiznos had nearly 10x its growth, which just shows you how powerful franchising can be, well, at least when done right. In June of 2001, the company went back to being private, so no more stock market, and they continue to grow. Now, fast forward to 2007, Quiznos hit its peak with roughly 4,700 stores, which is insane. Just stop and think about that for a second. In 1987, they had 12 locations, and 20 years later, they had 4,700 locations. Now, one of the biggest reasons for Quiznos' early success was the high-end approach they took to sub sandwiches. From the toasted bread to the menu and even the design of the stores. The idea was to be a more upscale version of a sub shop. But okay, let's just call it what it is. They just wanted to be an upscale version of Subway. Well, at first, this was an awesome idea. Unfortunately, it came back to bite them in the butt. The decline started around 2004. I'm not sure if you remember those commercials from then. Well, here, I'll just show you the clip.
We love these subs! 'Cause they are good to us! The Quiznos subs! They are tasty, they are crunchy, they are warm because they toast them!
Pretty creepy, right? Trust me, you aren't the only one that feels that way. It was reported that Quiznos received nearly 30,000 phone calls from customers complaining after the commercial's release. And later on, Business Insider called it one of the top 10 worst ad campaigns of all time. But after finally killing the ad, Quiznos corporate they claimed the ad as a win. They said, hey, it did what it was supposed to do, which was create a buzz. And Quiznos didn't stop there with the bizarre commercials. Years later, they made another controversial commercial that was a big swing and a miss with audiences. So it's safe to say Quiznos wasn't exactly winning in the marketing department. Between the horrible marketing, devastatingly low profit margins, and a rapidly declining brand, well, I'm sure you can imagine how stressful it would have been to be a Quiznos franchisee. And this all came to a breaking point around 2006. Franchisees had really gotten fed up with some of the business practices of Quiznos, and they felt like the parent company was prioritizing selling new franchises instead of focusing on the profitability of current franchisees. So in 2006, Quiznos franchise owners took corporate to court with a class action lawsuit. According to Forbes, they claimed corporate was making them what they termed captive customers and forcing them to buy food and supplies at higher than market prices. So this is where Quiznos' business model comes into play that would ultimately lead to their downfall. Typically, most franchisors will negotiate the prices of your cost of goods and food with vendors. Then the franchisee goes to the vendor and buys products from them, getting the savings passed down to them that the franchisor negotiated. For example, when I owned my franchise stores, we had a franchise vendor that the franchisor required us to purchase from. However, Quiznos did things differently. In the year 2000, Quiznos had formed a subsidiary called American Food Distributors. Quiznos would buy all of the supplies themselves, from the food to paper, etc., and then they would mark it up for a profit and then turn around and sell it to their franchisees. Having franchisees buy directly from Quiznos allowed that food distribution company that Quiznos owned to prosper, and it forced their franchisees to start out with food costs as high as 39%, which is about 10% higher than average. As you can imagine, this put Quiznos franchisees at a huge disadvantage. Now, to give you an idea, in the food business, you want to keep your overall food costs, including cups and paper and all that, to around 25 to 30% of your sales. So if you're doing $500,000 a year in sales, even on the higher end of 30%, that would be around $150,000 in cost. But at 39%, you're overpaying by nearly $50,000 a year, which makes it nearly impossible to be profitable in a business with already thin profit margins. Now, shifting back to the lawsuit, after tons of back and forth, they were forced to settle the class action lawsuit and ended up settling for over $206 million for their franchisees. Unfortunately, this was just the start of all the legal troubles. At the same time, Quiznos was fighting another class action lawsuit, and they were facing separate lawsuits from franchisees in Colorado, Illinois, and Wisconsin. The franchisees won $95 million, with a huge chunk of that going to franchisees who paid their franchise fees but were never allowed to open a restaurant because of location disputes. Quiznos lost sight of the importance of their franchisees and only focused on adding as many franchises as possible. Without successful and happy franchisees, you have no business. Just like without successful and happy employees, you have no business. Always take care of the people who work for you or with you. Now, the story of frustrated franchisees gets worse. This guy, Bhupinder Baber, owned 2 locations in Long Beach, and when another franchisee opened nearby, his sales plummeted. After getting no response from the corporate offices who had promised him no one would be opening nearby, he organized the Quiznos Franchisee Association in hopes of helping other owners fight against what they deemed unfair business practices. That was in 2004, and according to the Long Beach Post, that was when Quiznos ended Baber's franchise agreement. By 2005, Baber was slated to go to Denver to argue his claims against Quiznos corporate. Fearing that the trip was going to cost him too much and he would lose what little he had left, he walked into a Quiznos bathroom and killed himself. He left behind a note calling for an investigation into Quiznos and their business practices, and that note was released to the public. This wound up being yet another massive hit to the sub-company. All of these terrible decisions, lawsuits, and scandals just kept piling on. And this led to a massive decline in sales, revenue, and locations. In 2007, the walls really began crumbling in. The treatment of their franchisees started to catch up with them, amongst several other bad decisions. And most importantly, if you remember, right around 2007-2008, the world was going through the Great Recession, and people preferred cheap over fancy. The housing market crash and the horrible economy that followed were just soul-crushing to Quiznos. And between 2007 and 2009, Quiznos closed roughly 1,000 locations. The economic crash just exposed their weaknesses. One of them being that, remember, during these years, most American families were clinching on every penny that they had. So Subway's $5 footlong was absolutely crushing it during this time. Meanwhile, Quiznos' attempt at fancier subs was just too tough financially for most people. And this just added on to their losses and their huge hit and lost revenue. Between that and the ongoing fights and lawsuits with their franchisees, it created a downward spiral. In an effort to increase sales, Quiznos tried to compete on price with its competitors and up-and-coming brands like Jimmy John's and Firehouse Subs. But here's the problem. Quiznos crashed the price of their subs, but because of their business model, they didn't adjust for the cost of goods for its franchisees, meaning the cost of the ingredients to make the subs were way too high compared to what they were selling for. So many franchisees who were already struggling were forced out of business because their already thin margins were being shrunk even more by lower sales prices. And this is just one of the many decisions that led to a mob of angry franchisees coming after Quiznos. And ultimately what led to Quiznos' downfall is that they prioritized making money as a corporation over having happy and profitable franchise owners. A franchise brand cannot thrive long-term without happy and profitable franchise owners. Once that began to unravel, the marketing controversies and legal battles just added fuel to the fire, and unfortunately forcing Quiznos to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2014. Now, filing Chapter 11 was an attempt to reduce their debt by about $400 million and have a fresh start. After bankruptcy, Quiznos made efforts to revitalize the brand. They redesigned stores, made menu changes, and attempted to mend the fences with franchisees. But so far, it hasn't worked out as well as they hoped, even though they sold to a private investment firm in 2018 for an undisclosed amount. Right now, there are only about 400 locations left worldwide, and in 2021, the company profited an astounding 15 grand. Quiznos is really just hanging on by the skin of their teeth at this point, and all it's going to take is really one more bad decision or unfortunate event to put them out of business for good. So the question is, after years of bad decisions, mistreatment of their franchisees, and unforgiving scandals, is it possible for them to make some kind of comeback? Only time will tell. Now, if you didn't know, F45 is in a similar situation with a lot of controversy going on. You can check out that story here and find out more about the drama going on with Mark Wahlberg and F45. I'll see you on the next one.